Thank you for coming out. Good to see everybody. Got a good crowd. I'd like to welcome y'all tonight. And in case y'all not familiar with who's here, and I know everyone knows Janet, we'd like to welcome her and thank her for taking time out of her schedule to come out here. It's always a joy to listen to you. She is, in case for you guys that don't know who she is our extension horticultural specialist. It's a lot of words there. And with our cooperative extension agency out in Pulaski County. And she is kind of over all 75 counties, correct?
That's correct.
So she's got a lot under her belt. And tonight she's going to be talking to us on fall gardening. So let's all give her a good warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we've had a taste of fall weather, have we not? But it got a little warm today. We have our air conditioning turned off and you walk in the house and it's a little bit warm, but at least it cools down at night. The one thing though that has been surprising is how dry it is. But it is starting to be very pretty outside. You know, we've got pumpkins. If you love pumpkins, and you know I love orange, so I love pumpkins, there are so many available right now, from gourds and pumpkins to all that metal yard art to garden mums. You know, they're out there in force. Now, I've noticed that some stores, the mums are still pretty tight in bud. In fact, you're not even seeing much color. In other places, we're seeing a lot of color. So it depends on how long you want them to last. When I'm going out to buy mums for my yard, I typically look for something about like this or maybe this. I don't want it full open, because if it's fully open the day you buy it, and it stays warm like it's been doing, it's not going to last that long in the garden. But if you've got some color showing, some flowers open, but still a lot of tight buds, that can last for a good 6 weeks in the garden, giving you color, provided you keep it watered. If you let them get too dry, they're in pots, they are going to dry out. But mums are out there. But it's not just about plants right now. There's so much yard art, whether it's Halloween or just fall in general, that you can add to that color pretty instantly in the garden. But if you still have plants that are your summer plants that are doing well, continue to enjoy them. Some of them, if you've been watering, are still doing great. There are others that are really beginning to decline. You do not have to wait for a killing frost before you get out there and cut back all the perennials. You can go ahead and start doing that as they die back, but continue to enjoy them, and we got to get prepared. You know, we have had, last winter was pretty much non-existent. You know, they predicted it was going to be horrible. The 2 years before that, we had the polar vortex. Who ever heard of that word? And then they said we were having the polar express. So are the persimmons right? Anybody cut a persimmon seed yet this year? So what did it have inside?
I did this weekend. It had a spoon.
Well,
I cut 4 of them.
Okay, what does a spoon mean? Anybody know what these mean?
Snow.
Snow. If it has, usually they say if you cut into the seed of a native persimmon, it's going to have either a spoon, a fork, or a knife. Now, to be honest, I don't know that I've ever seen a fork, but I have seen some knives. But spoons mean snow. What did we have last year? Anybody know what they had in the persimmons last year? Spoons. We didn't have much snow at all. So whether or not this works, we don't know. We can hope for the best. But start planting for fall. You know, one of the things I teach all the time with Master Gardener training is we don't want what I call a one-season wonder. And that's where people plant their garden for spring. And we have a lot of them out there because the #1 plant in our landscapes is azaleas. So we have gardens that are loaded with azaleas, dogwoods, and daffodils. It's a showpiece for about a month. And after that, what do you have to look at? We need to make sure that we have something with color or something with blooms in every season. So whether you're adding, this is just the house plant croton. They're selling them still right now. I buy those usually midsummer. You can get them for $8 to $10. They've got a very thick, waxy leaf. So that means that you don't have to keep them watered quite as much as something that has a much thinner leaf to it. Put it out there, the more sunlight it gets, the more colors it has. Yellows, oranges, and reds. And then you've got all these winter annuals that you can put out. But think about some of these perennials that bloom only in the fall. Japanese anemones. These come in pink or white. They prefer a little bit of protection from the hottest afternoon sun, but they are stunning right now, and they will bloom from now up until almost a frost. The keylone, this one here is called turtle head, is the common name for it. Doesn't that flower sort of look like the head of a turtle? That's another great shade perennial for fall color. And then the toad lilies, the tricertus. They've been blooming for quite a while in my garden. In fact, I think my toad lilies are a little bit too happy in my yard. They are spreading like crazy. So I finally got tired of pulling them out this summer, and I took the weed eater to them. So my normal toad lilies are about this tall, and they have flowers all over. But the ones I weed eated are this tall, and they're still covered in blooms. So I may weed eat the whole batch next year. We'll just see. But that's another easy care perennial for good fall color for us. And let's not think, the only thing we think of a lot of times when we think of color is flowers. But we can achieve color with berries, with colorful bark, but also with foliage. And we do have a lot of plants that do have great fall color. I think we often forget about the crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtles have beautiful summer blooms, but they have great fall foliage. And then they have that peeling bark if you don't have the bark scale, which we'll talk about later. We've also got the Chinese pistache, one of the most colorful plants we'll have in the fall of the year. And then Itea down there in the middle. So that's a great plant. It's native, a good shrub. It drops its leaves, but it turns fire engine red before it does so. Now, what is the best precursor to good fall color? Cool nights and warm days, which we're having, but then moisture, which we're not having. So we hope we get a little bit of that, because have you noticed there are quite a few trees that are shedding leaves in earnest. If it gets too dry for too long, a lot of those deciduous plants will start to shut down early to conserve their resources, and they'll shed their leaves before they get that good fall color. So hopefully we will get a little bit of rain. We've got a prediction this week, I think on Thursday it's supposed to rain. Just 20%? Well, let's all go do a rain dance and maybe that'll help. Okay, some other ones. Japanese maples. You know, that's a beautiful small ornamental tree. And I say small, but think about it. There are some that get quite large. So look at the plant tag when you're buying your Japanese maples and see how large they're supposed to get. I see people sometimes planting them either in large containers or right next to the front door, expecting this nice small diminutive tree, and then it gets 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide and they can't get into the front door. So make sure you do know something about the mature size. And if you're looking for a particular fall color, the best time to buy those trees is in the fall when they've got their fall color. Because you may go buy a red maple tree and think it's a red maple, it's going to be red in the fall. Unless you buy a name variety like Autumn Glory, they're going to be maybe yellow in the fall, orange in the fall, or brown in the fall. So buy one with that fall color and you'll be guaranteed. The Amur River maple right here, we often grow that as a large shrub or a small tree. Typically it has multi-trunks on it, fire engine red every year in the fall of the year. And let's not forget about grasses. There are a lot of great ornamental grasses out there. Japanese forest grass is the only one that will live in the shade. You know, most of our true grasses, they like sun. So if you're looking for a shade lover, that one will do very well. Probably the most popular one today is the purple muley grass. Purple muley grass right now is putting on that haze of sort of a purplish pink flower to it, and that's the seed heads. And if you're looking for something a little bit larger, that miscanthus there, Mount Washington, it gets large. It gets to be about 8 feet tall. But you're growing these grasses for this fall color, but also for winter interest, because after we have a killing frost, these true grasses are dead to the ground. But we don't want to get out there as soon as we have a killing frost and clean up the grasses. We're also growing those to give some interest in that winter landscape with texture, sound, and those plumes that do persist until spring. Mahonias. Now there are two basic mahonias we grow. We grow the big old-fashioned Oregon grape holly that gets about 4 to 6 feet tall, very coarse textured thorny leaves, and that one blooms in January or February or March, depending on the spring that we're having. And the newest one, though, is this one here on the right called Soft Caress. Soft Caress has no thorns on it. If you look at it up close, it almost looks like a little palm tree, like a parlor palm house plant you'd have inside. Very soft textured foliage, and it produces its spikes of yellow blooms in late September, October, or early November, depending on the season. Mine are just starting to put the flower buds up, but that is a great evergreen shrub for the shade, and it gives you those blooms then in a season when we could use some help. Malva viscus, or Turk's turban. If you have this is in the hibiscus family. If you look at those flowers, they're about 2 or 3 inches long, and they're like a little curled up hibiscus. The butterflies and the hummingbirds love this plant, and it's a perennial. It will come back year after year, and it doesn't start blooming until late in the season. Okay, hyacinth bean. This is an annual vine. You know, people plant wisteria and it takes over the world sometimes, or they plant. In fact, I just had a question I wrote for my column this week about this person just saw kudzu for the first time, and they found it in Marshall, Arkansas, and she said, so do you think there's a plan on how to control this weed? Is it going to continue to spread? And I went, let's drive around the south and you'll see some kudzu. But this is an annual vine, so it is not going to be aggressive. Save some seeds, plant it out because it doesn't reseed itself very well, and it gives you a lot of color in that late summer, early fall garden. Confederate rose. Anybody growing this? This is Hibiscus mutabilis. This is the hibiscus that it dies to the ground in the fall. It grows about 8 to 10 feet tall in one season, and then it is covered in these carnation-like blooms. Now, it's called mutabilis because the flowers mutate from the morning until the evening. They're open about a day. They'll start off either a light pink and fade to a really dark pink, or white to dark pink, depending on the variety. It doesn't bloom for us usually until October. So I have seen buds. I have not seen any open yet. In some years, when we've had a very late spring, it was late to get started because what do hibiscus like? Warm soil and plenty of water. So if they're late to get started, we have had a few years when they were just beginning to show color and an early frost hit, and then we kind of lose them. But they are winter hardy through central Arkansas, but give them room to grow. Sumacs are really stunning plants for fall color, but you don't want the ones that grace the highway. If you think how well they do in the medians of the highway, plant those in your yard with a little bit of care, and pretty soon your whole yard is sumac. This is tiger eyes, which is a cut leaf sumac that turns vibrant yellow and orange in the fall before they go dormant. And here's another native, the strawberry euonymus, or wahoo, or heart suburston. This has a tiny little yellowish green flower in the summer months, and then the fruits come on and they look sort of like a strawberry, that kind of pinkish color, and then they pop open and these bright orange seeds pop out. Now, it's not going to stop traffic, they're small, but it does give you interest in a shade garden. And this is the signature plant down at Garvin Gardens, beautyberry or calocarpa or French mulberry. Great plant for the garden. It'll grow in full sun to pretty heavy shade. Where you see those clusters of purple berries, in the summer have little clusters of light flowers, and then you have these great berries. If you don't like this bright purple one, they do sell a white one and a light lavender one as well. Camellias. How many of you grow camellias? You know, I wish every hand went up. How many of you grow azaleas? A lot more hands went up. Camellias, I think, bloom a lot longer and are much showier in our gardens than azaleas. Now, there are two basic types that you're seeing there. The two on the left are Camellia sasanquas. The sasanquas will start blooming in November, December, and January. They are loaded with buds this year. They're going to be stunning. They come in white, pink, or red. The one on the right is a Camellia japonica, and that one usually starts blooming for us late February, March into April. But we've got a lot of other things happening in February, March, and April. in November, December, January, what else do you have blooming? Put these out in the garden. They're much more drought tolerant than an azalea. They need the same kind of conditions, morning sun, afternoon shade. Get them established with water, but once you get them established, they pretty much take care of themselves. So a great plant for the garden. Again, look at the plant tag. Your japonicas tend to be more tree-like. They get large. Where your sasanquas, there are varieties that get no taller than 4 feet. So they make a nice foundation planting. Instead of a holly, why not plant a camellia that gives you leaves, green leaves year round, but then color? My sasanqua down here at the bottom, this pink one, I get blooms on it from November, usually through January. And last year, because we had such a mild winter, I still had blooms at the Flower and Garden Show in February. So 4 months of flowers, you can't get that with an azalea. Okay, let's talk about winter annuals. They're out there in force right now. I bought some this weekend. Now, violas are more forgiving than pansies. Violas will tolerate more extremes of temperature without getting leggy. But if you're planting the flowering kale or flowering cabbage, this time of year, insects have had a chance to build up. And the cabbage looper can't tell the difference between an edible variety and an ornamental one, and they can eat them. So do be paying attention. If you're putting out, there's the violas down there at the bottom that I just bought this weekend. You can plant those earlier in the fall, and they will last later into the spring because, as I said, they can tolerate more fluctuations of temperature. So I tend to use more violas than I do pansies, but pansies are still the most popular of the bedding plants for fall color. If you want to plant late, like I still have great summer color, and I hate to start pulling it. Now my common impatiens, they're not looking too good, but my sun patiens are great, the periwinkle's great, so I'm gradually starting to plant around there. But you could buy your annuals if you want to keep them alive, but if you wait until November or December, you can still plant winter color. But the later you plant, the bigger and flowering the plants need to be. Because if you buy little bitty green plants in December, you'll have little bitty green plants until spring, and then they'll start to bloom right when it's time to plant your summer color. So get those planted with some color on them, get them established, and then fertilize off and on throughout the winter. But snapdragons are there, stock is there, sweet alyssum, those are all plants that you can put out in the fall. But what about edible landscaping? You know, I have some master gardeners that if they can't eat it, they don't want it in their garden. And so there's a lot of ways now that you can add beauty to your garden and still eat it. Now, parsley and cilantro, I can't find cilantro right now. I'm looking really hard, but I did buy some parsley this weekend. This is a great time to put parsley out. It does great all cool season. You can go out there and harvest it. The Swiss chard, I've got an experiment going in my garden. I planted some Swiss chard. This will be its 3rd year. I planted it 3 years ago this fall, and I harvest it and it comes back and I harvest it. It's in the beet family, and instead of building that big root that we eat underground, it does form a pretty sturdy stalk. And if you harvest from the top, it keeps generating leaves. So I'm going to see how long it lasts. Maybe I'll go in the Guinness Book of World Records and have 10-year-old Swiss chard. And we're eating off of it during the summer. And then there at the top, I just bought that. Now I have to admit, I don't eat that. That is that purple mustard, and I am not a mustard greens fan. But it is gorgeous. And the longer it grows and the cooler it gets, the more dark purple that foliage gets. And so last year I had it this big and this tall. If we have a really devastating cold, if it gets below 28 degrees, it can burn back. But what I do, and I know all of you that are gardeners have this at home as well, don't you have a bunch of 5-gallon pots or gallon pots laying around your yard or in your garage? If they're predicting temperatures below 28 degrees, I just take those pots and I invert them over the top of these plants. If I have a lot, I take my wheelbarrow and I invert it over the top of those plants. And I leave it covered for a week or until it warms up. Take that off, the plants look great, and that's not a lot of work, and they keep on going. So all of these are great plants that you can put out. Spring bulbs, spring blooming bulbs. You can find them now at every garden center, discount store, nursery. It's a great time to buy them. I'd still wait for it to cool off just a little bit. You know, if you plant them in really warm soil, they may start trying to grow. And so I really wait for the soil to get a little bit colder. Wait, and remember, the size of the bulb determines the size of the bloom. You know, sometimes you can go to the store and you see this bag that has 100 bulbs for $5. You get what you pay for. The bulbs might be this big around, so you're going to have tiny little blooms on them. So look for some large, firm bulbs. Plant them 2 to 2.5 times the depth in the ground as large as they are. So if they're tiny bulbs, you can plant them a little bit shallower, but the bigger bulbs we do plant deeper. How many of you put bulb fertilizer or bulb food down when you plant? It's kind of a waste of time, because when you buy that bulb, it already has the flower in it, it has the leaves in it, you can cut it in half and see all of that. But people sometimes would use bone meal to help the root system get established. It's really not necessary. The best thing is to have good soil. And if you're like me, I have pitiful soil. I have rock city. So I amend. And if you can add some compost, make sure the soil is well drained. That's better than fertilizing when you plant. And there's so many to choose from. If you start with crocus and you go with late blooming flowering onions, you can have color with bulbs in your garden from late January through April or May. So plant with a bunch of different things out there. And the best way to plant is if you can till up a whole area and then just take your bulbs and just throw them in there. Make sure they're facing upward if you can. And then cover it with soil and they'll all just come up together. You know, there's a lot of people that make these perfect rows and they line things up. It's a whole lot easier to mass plant. It makes a bigger statement when they bloom as well. Okay, house plants. How many of you move your house plants inside for the winter?
Not yet.
No, how many of you do move your house plants inside for the winter? Well, I typically don't. I typically say that I go out of town a lot, and when killing frost occurs, I say, oh, missed it again. They didn't make it in. We'll have to buy new. But you know, last year my father passed away, and so lots of people gave me plants. And I thought, well, you know, they went to the trouble to send me these plants. I can't let them die. You couldn't even get in my spare bedroom. There were so many plants in there. So this year I'll be a little bit more selective. But when you're moving your house plants inside, you need to do it pretty soon, by the middle of October. We've already had some cool nights. It's been in the upper 40s. So those plants don't know they're not winter hardy. So as they get those cool nights, they start to harden off. They start to get prepared for winter. And so then you move them inside to a house that is heated, that is 24/7 the same temperature. And if you keep your house warm, bring your plants in today. I keep my house cool, so they're okay. But you want to put them in the coolest room in your house, cut back on the water, and give them as much light as you can. But if your house is hot in the winter, you have no humidity, lower light, you wonder why they drop leaves. Yeah. And so, you know, the weatherman gets out there the night before a killing frost and he says, tonight's a killing frost, bring those plants in. I head out of town. No, but but if you wait that late, your plants have been exposed to a lot of cool temperatures, and then you bring them in and they drop every leaf they have on them. So if you're bringing them in the house, do it soon.
So if I leave it outside, they need to cover?
If you leave it outside, you buy a new plant next year. So clean them up before you bring them in. Look for insects, because if you bring a plant in that has aphids or spider mites or scale, and you group all your plants together, they share their love of insects. And you'll pretty soon have them everywhere. So clean them up before you bring them in.
Snails, geckos, and small snakes.
Well, and the snake one, you know, that goes on the internet every year when that happens. People, so Julie Treat, my assistant, hates snakes. So she's terrified about bringing anything in. Here's my theory. If it's a run-of-the-mill plant that you can buy at Walmart for 20 bucks, buy a new plant every year. $20 is a pretty cheap investment. Now, I was doing a talk one day and I kept saying, well, I buy it new next year, or I do that new. And this woman came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, you have to remember, some of us are on fixed incomes and we can't afford to buy plants the way you do. Her husband smokes cigarettes. She goes to Starbucks and buys a cup of coffee every day almost. I said, I make my coffee at home. I don't smoke. That's my cigarettes and my coffee. So, and I bet you they spend a whole lot more on cigarettes and coffee than I do by spending a couple of $100s in the spring on these plants that last me for 5 or 6 months. So for me, that's a good investment. But I'm going to be bringing some things inside this year. I think so anyway. I'm planning to. This one, I found this last year. It's called Iachroma. The problem is that sometimes I get these really weird, unusual things that I love, and I think I'll buy it next year, and I can't find it again. And so then I don't have it. You know, I found this fabulous Brazilian plume plant one year. It bloomed on my front porch in the shade. I have never found it again, and I didn't bring it in. So I think I'm going to bring it in, or I'm going to bring in a cutting. That's another option. Take cuttings off of some of these and propagate it. Look at that hibiscus. I took that picture Saturday. That's on my deck. That's a gorgeous hibiscus. I'm probably going to let it die. And because they often don't bloom as well the second year. I get more complaints from people that move those plants inside, baby them, and they'll go, why is it not blooming next year? And that's because they don't prune it hard. So I might stick it in the garage and see if it survives. But something like a bougainvillea, it's toast. I'll just buy a new one next year. So here are your options. If you have room in your house, again, the sunniest room, the coolest room, group them together. That's going to raise the humidity. I have 4 dogs, so you see my problem. And the other thing is you could take your plants, and if you had no dogs or cats, you could get a big tray, fill it with pebbles, and put your plants on top of those pebbles and keep water in that tray. And that's going to, as that water is evaporating, it's going to raise the humidity, and your plants are going to be a whole lot happier. I'd have 4 dogs in the tray going after the water, so that's not going to happen there. But that's one option, and that's the one that you need to move them in pretty soon. This is a garage or a basement. I hope you don't want to put a car in there. But you can see, you probably can't see real well, they even moved a baby swimming pool in there and filled it with water, and they were overwintering their tropical pond plants in there. And then this is the crawl space under your house. If you have a crawl space under your house, it actually stays very warm. So you could move your tropicals, your house plants, your ferns underneath there before a freeze. And you can wait till a freeze, because they don't look gorgeous when you move them back out. They look dead, or pretty darn close to it, but they're alive. The root system is alive. You cut them back, you start watering, and they come back. But remember, tropical plants that bloom in the summer love fertilizer and water. To keep them blooming, you do have to keep fertilizing.
Yeah, excuse me, I have it orange, lemon, and lime miniature trees, and I have it in the deck.
They've got to come in.
They have to come in.
Yep.
I did last year, but they didn't look
And
nice.
well, again, move them in pretty soon, but give them bright sunlight and cool. If you have a window in your kitchen or your bathroom, those are the best 2 places, because those are the most humid areas of your house. And you can do what I do and buy new plants every year. We're supporting the green industry. Okay, if you are planting, you might hear the slogan, fall is for planting. It's a great time to plant right now. Hardy plants. I personally would not plant hydrangeas, gardenias, azaleas. I wouldn't plant those in the fall of the year, because if we have a really cold winter, even established plants get frozen back. But I would be planting things like the camellias or the hollies or, boxwoods, anything that's really tough and hardy, and trees. I think the best time of year to plant a tree is November. We all talk about planting trees at Arbor Day, which is the 3rd Monday in March in Arkansas. All these school kids plant all these trees, and they are so proud of them, and then they leave school for the summer, and they come back to dead trees because nobody watered them. Where if we planted in the fall, they would have fall, winter, and spring to get a root system established, and then they could survive a little bit better. But most today, our plants come in containers. Even trees are coming in large pots. Bald and burlap, we start planting those usually now, October through about April or May. Bare root, those are the plants that come in the little cardboard sleeves, usually in January and February. So those, we want to buy them while they're dormant and plant them while they're dormant. Know how large those plants are going to get at maturity. You know, I tell this a lot on myself, but whenever I pass a nursery, my car just sort of is on autopilot. If I have time, I just zip in. I got to tell you, Friday morning, if you read my blog, you've already heard this, but Friday morning, I was leaving Fort Smith, and we were having a secretary change at the office, so I wanted to stop and buy the two that had been helping us out while Holly was off, a couple of mums. So I went to Lowe's. There was a Lowe's right across the street from my hotel. And so I pulled in, the garden center gates weren't even open. So I went through the store to go out there, I'm getting my mums. Well, here comes the garden center manager, and he's opening the gates, and he goes, today, I'm marking down all the trees, shrubs, and roses, 75% off. I'm like, 75% off? Do I need any trees, shrubs, or roses? No, but they're a bargain. So I turn around, get the bigger cart, and start looking. And I came home, I filled up my car. I mean, I have all kinds of stuff. I said, what about these blackberries? Oh yeah, they're on sale too. Bought some more of those. So I have all kinds of stuff. So then I stopped and I thought, well, I filled up the cart as much as I could get. I mean, I had stuff stacked on top of stuff. And so I thought on the way back, I wonder if Russellville's Lowe's is on sale. So I whipped off over there, walked in, I said, well, you got anything on sale? They had marked a thing down there, so I had to just go on. But I bought this lovely plant a few years ago, actually about 8 or 9 years ago, and it was a Laura Petalum. It was the first time I'd seen one, and it was at a nursery in Conway. And the tag said it would get 5 to 6 feet tall. Well, the first year it was 8 feet tall. And so, I'm in pitiful soil here, pitiful soil. Pruned it back. The next year it was 10 feet tall. And I pruned it, and it kept growing. And finally, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. It is now 19 feet tall, and I have tree formed it. It's an evergreen tree in front of my house. But that was blocking my kitchen window. So now I have this lovely tree, and I tell people I planned it that way because I'm not taking it out. But do try to know the ultimate height. Choose a plant that has more than one season of interest, like those crepe myrtles. Flowers, foliage, bark. This is that itea I mentioned earlier. There's the flowers, there's that foliage, and they smell like honey. It's starting to spread a little bit in my garden. If it's got good soil, it will. Try some new plants. I always tell people you're not a true gardener if you've never lost a plant, because that means you're not experimenting with things. And if a plant is not looking good, don't belabor it. I've got people that bring me a leaf in, the plant is half dead, and they go, how do I save it? A chainsaw. Take that sucker out and put something new in. Life is too short to live with bad plants, and there's too many good ones out there to try. So try something new and see if you like it. We don't call them purple coneflowers anymore. We call them coneflowers because they're yellow and orange and red and white. Agastache, if you're trying to attract butterflies and bees, that thing blooms all summer long in full sun. And instead of the old purple giant hyssop, you can now get pinks and reds and oranges and yellows and even some that have variegated foliage. Water is still critical. In fact, I would say anything else in gardening, this comes down to the success or failure. Too much, which we saw this summer, resulted in not too good of tomatoes this year. Yeah. Too little, and plants die if we don't supplement. The problem is, I think sometimes it's easier to deal with the drier conditions because we can water if we're willing to pay the price. Sometimes when we're flooded, there's not a lot we can do about that. But water is still critical. Know how much your yard needs. People ask me all the time, how much should I be watering and how often? Well, what kind of soil do you have? What are you growing? What kind of slope is there? How much sun? All of those are parameters, and every yard is going to be different. So practice with what you're doing in your own yard. Vegetable gardening, edible gardening continues to gain in popularity. This is year 5, and the trend continues this way. It's not steadying off, it's continuing to go up. Look at your catalogs. If you think about all the big name companies, they're always touting their newest hydrangeas or roses or some kind of ornamental. Now they've got blueberry bushes and raspberries and espalier apple trees. You know, everybody's getting into this edible edible. So vegetable transplants are out there. This is what I planted this weekend. That's my bok choy and my arugula. So I pulled up the tomatoes that looked hideous. But you can have lots of pretty plants in the garden, and for the most part we can now garden almost uncovered unless we get really cold. How many of you have figs in your yard? We had a great fig year, didn't we? But have you noticed your fig trees are loaded with fruit again? I mean, those pictures I took yesterday, look at all the figs, and I just finished harvesting figs. Now, will those figs grow enough to mature? I will be very surprised, unless we have a really late first frost. There's a group of figs called a breba crop, where they can set. Normally, they're only supposed to set like that tiny little bud, and it's supposed to overwinter, and we harvest it very early. This year, they've moved on, so I don't know that they'll survive our winters where we can harvest them, but we can always hope. If they're in pots, they're going to be a lot less winter hardy than if they're in the ground. And this one, Julie, is in that big orange tub on my deck. It's doing great. Okay, season extenders. They're very easy to do. You know, I said you can just invert a pot or a cardboard box over the plants. But you can make these little trellises or these little frames. That's just PVC. This is just hog wire. Make that trellis. If you have the option to use something like this Rime, which is fabric, I would opt for that because it's breathable. For me, the plastic covers don't work because I'm on the road so much. You need to be present if you're using plastic, because plastic is going to have to be vented during the day on these sunny days, even in the winter. Where the fabric, it still gives you that air pocket there. It's going to give you several degrees of protection, and you can grow now year round. This was the one that fits over my garden, and it worked really well. If I was there to unzip it every morning and zip it back up at night, it did great. The other problem with plastic is what? No rainfall's getting in, so you're going to have to water underneath that plastic if you leave it out there for very long. And there's a really rudimentary one, just taking an old milk jug and cutting the bottom out and sticking that over the top of it. Make sure you know what you're doing. You know, I took this picture one day. That was a Walmart bag covering their plants. That's not giving you, that's just making work for yourself. That's not helping that plant in the slightest. And if you are going to use plastic, you know, we've always said don't use plastic. You can use plastic as long as there's a frame to support that plastic. But you don't want that plastic in contact with the plants, or you're building up moisture underneath there. Sun comes out, it's going to cook it, or it's going to freeze at night when there's no heater on underneath that. We had a good year for hydrangeas at last, did we not? In fact, that's my plant at the bottom. I told them they were gone. I was pulling them out of the yard. I had 2 years with no blooms. I didn't get them pulled, and they bloomed beautifully this year, so they have a reprieve. But that's what mine looks like right now. They were bright pink and blue earlier. Then they kind of went to that kind of tannish color, and now they're turning crimson. So I think they're kind of pretty with just these spent blooms on there. If yours are brown and you like the dried look, leave them out there. If you want to, you can go ahead and start cleaning it up. But let's hope, because you know when they go into winter, they look like a bunch of dead sticks. But those dead sticks contain these buds, which are the biggest flowers. So if we have a cold snap and it freezes back, there goes your flowers. One thing that was not slowed down in the slightest this year were weeds. They are everywhere. In fact, I was out spraying and weed eating this weekend. This one is the one I hate the most in my yard. That is called Chambers Bitters. And you know, we always say, just like we have warm season annuals and cool season annuals, we have warm season weeds and cool season weeds. So these are going to die with cold, and these are going to get started when it does get cold. We tell people to try to get them weeded and at least hoed down or cut or whatever before they bloom. Do you see any flowers on this?
No.
The flowers are on the underside. I had a gentleman that sent me a picture last year, and his were about this tall. And he said, I'm trying to figure out what this is. I kind of like it. I'm encouraging it. And I went, good, it's coming back next year. Because when it's that tall, it's going to have 1 million seeds on it. When they're this tall, they've already got seeds on the bottom. And it waits till it warms up. So if you see it, get rid of it. If you have plants that are just dying on their natural death, it's fall, they're going down, clean up that spent debris, add it to your compost pile. But if you have diseased foliage, this is not the time of year to start a spray schedule. Don't worry about it, but clean up. As those leaves fall, rake it up and get it out of the yard. If you live in an area where you can burn them, burn them. We don't in Little Rock. So I put them out for the yard waste. They can pick it up and take it. And people say, but I thought composting got hot enough to kill all that stuff. Well, it does in the center of the pile, but a home compost pile is too wide. We don't generate enough uniform heat throughout that pile from one end to the other to kill it. How many of you have a compost pile? How many of you have seen an errant squash plant or this cucurbit that starts growing? If it's not killing those seeds, it's not killing your weeds or your diseases either. So add things to the compost pile that are really kind of clean, and just clean these things up. Fall pests. How many of you had your yards eaten alive by army worms this summer? They were the worst we've ever had them. I mean, they were taking things like crazy. I have fall webworms on a container plant on my deck, which I've never seen before. So watch for these pests, because the later in the season it is, the harder they are to kill. Properly identify the problem. If you're not sure what's wrong, or even if you think you know it, send it to your county extension office and see if they can confirm it. Because the person who had this camellia, she called me up and she said, we've been spraying, my husband and I've been spraying now for months for this powdery mildew, and it's not getting any better. It wasn't powdery mildew. That's a scale insect called T-scale. And if it's on the upper surface of the leaf, you know you've had it a while. So identify, and both of those insects in that picture, from these larger ones to these tiny white specks, are both scale. Scale comes in many forms and can be devastating to a plant. How many of you see this black sooty mold on the trunks of your crepe myrtles? This has been an insect that started in Arkansas 3 years ago, and it is multiplying at rapid rates. When we first found it, it was in Little Rock and a couple of counties, Texarkana, it's bad down there. It started in Dallas, but I've had reports this year in Fort Smith, in West Memphis, in Blytheville. It's moving. Pretty soon it's going to blanket the state. Now, we do have a fact sheet on it on our website that talks about what to do. In the fall of the year, the best thing you can do is clean up the debris. And if you've got the stems that are really black, just get a little soft nail brush and wipe it down with warm soapy water to kind of get that off. And then spray it with a dormant oil. Saturate it with a dormant oil. And then next year in February or March, put down a systemic insecticide that the plant can absorb, and you'll be clean. But you got to do it. If you don't, if you ignore it, it's going to get worse and worse. And what it's doing, we don't know if it's going to kill the plants eventually. We don't think so. But we haven't had it long enough to know long-term ramifications. But we do know that it greatly reduces the amount of flowers that you have. And I was just speaking last weekend in somewhere, West Memphis, I think, and I was saying we had not seen any crepe myrtle scale on the dwarf plants. I went home that afternoon and was looking at my dwarf crepe myrtle, and it was covered in it. So it has and I have a large one, it's not touching. So it does like some varieties better than others. But do think seasonality. Expand your palette. Add some plants that give you color and interest in the fall. Put out some pumpkins and gourds. Put some plants out that have pretty berries or flowers in the spring or the summer. And whether you like lawns or vegetable gardens or fruits, really formal style gardens or more informal style gardens, if you have sun or shade, you can garden. And the whole key is have fun with your garden and get out in your garden.